Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is honestly fascinating and yet kind of entirely overlooked. We're looking at the intersection between a massive cultural phenomenon and clinical psychology. We are going to take the emotional weight of being the eldest daughter, which is a role that literally shapes millions of women, and map it directly onto the clinical pathways for developing Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, or OCD. It's an incredible connection that sheds so much light on why so many high-achieving women struggle with hidden anxiety. So let's just get right into it.
If you've ever felt that crushing exhaustion of basically being your family's anchor, listen to this for a second. I've been conditioned to think I must mediate every argument in my family and fix them. I'm also the first person my mother turns to when she is stressed. That right there perfectly illustrates the hidden emotional labor forced upon parentified children. This isn't just about doing a few extra chores around the house. It's about being conditioned from a super young age to absorb all the stress of the adults around you. Just think about the immense psychological toll it takes to be the constant mediator before you've even figured out who you are.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover the eldest daughter role, cultural pressures and expectations, pathways to inflated responsibility, triggers, guilt, and OCD, therapeutic healing and IFS, and finally, setting boundaries for burnout.
All right, let's jump into Section 1, the eldest daughter role, or what I like to call the little mother mask.
We're talking about kids who essentially become early caregivers, stepping in to cook dinners or babysit or tutor siblings way before they should ever have to. They basically get cast as the ultimate rule followers and peacemakers. And parents, well, they often use their eldest as a sort of trial run, pushing them to be this flawless, perfect example for the younger kids. Because these eldest daughters are so incredibly focused on solving internal family problems, they learn to just suppress their own emotional needs to keep the peace. They grow up entirely too fast. They end up trading a carefree childhood for this really early, super heavy crown of responsibility.
Moving right along to Section 2, cultural pressures and expectations, the weight of tradition.
The environment you grow up in, it massively amplifies all these expectations. Like, in immigrant families, for instance, eldest daughters aren't just doing chores. They become vital cultural brokers. They're translating complex documents, handling serious paperwork, and acting as literal executive assistants to their parents. Combine that with collectivist cultures that heavily emphasize filial duty, plus patriarchal gender norms that often excuse brothers from caregiving while demanding self-sacrifice from females, and you've got a perfect storm of immense, unyielding pressure on young girls.
Okay, Section 3, pathways to inflated responsibility, the clinical connection.
Here is where the clinical puzzle pieces really start coming together. We need to understand inflated responsibility. This is a psychological state where you feel intensely personally responsible for preventing harm to other people. It's actually the absolute core schema that maintains obsessive-compulsive disorder. When you're dealing with inflated responsibility, you truly believe that if you don't act, something terrible is going to happen, and it will be 100% your fault.
Clinical psychologist Paul Salkaviscus and his colleagues actually outlined 5 theoretical pathways that explain exactly how this dangerous level of responsibility develops in adolescence. Broad heightened responsibility early in life, rigid codes of conduct, being shielded from responsibility, a specific negative incident, and misinterpretation of thoughts and actions, or thought-action fusion. Notice those first 2 pathways, early heightened responsibility and rigid codes of conduct? Sound familiar? It's literally the exact definition of the eldest daughter experience. They're handed adult tasks way too early and told they have to follow rigid, perfect moral codes to be the good example.
And this brings up a super fascinating clinical contrast. You can actually develop OCD vulnerabilities in 2 entirely opposite ways. On one hand, you've got parentification, the classic eldest daughter pathway, where a kid is pushed into early duties and rigid moral codes. But on the flip side, matching up with pathway 3 is overprotection. This is where a child is completely shielded from responsibility, which leaves them terrified and feeling totally incompetent when they finally have to face the real world. Both of these extremes severely disrupt a child's healthy relationship with control and responsibility. Which leads us directly to Section 4, triggers, guilt, and OCD, the breaking point.
So let's talk about Pathway 5, which involves a really fascinating OCD mechanism known as thought-action fusion, or TAF. Basically, if you've been primed your whole life to feel overly responsible, your brain kind of starts playing tricks on you. Thought-action fusion is this cognitive bias where you incorrectly convince yourself that your passing, fleeting thoughts actually caused a negative outcome. Or you start believing that just having an unacceptable thought is morally just as bad as actually committing the action.
Everyday coincidences turn into this crushing internalized guilt, which just completely fuels the compulsive need to constantly fix things. And left unchecked, these deep-seated clinical beliefs just fuel massive adult burnout. The consequences are honestly severe. Adult eldest daughters often deal with chronic anxiety, utter exhaustion, and a lot of hidden resentment for a childhood they never really got to enjoy. In the workplace, they're overworking but suffering from severe imposter syndrome, feeling like nothing they do is ever enough. In romance, they unconsciously gravitate toward emotionally unavailable partners because, well, that codependent, caretaking dynamic feels like home to them. And shadowing absolutely everything is this constant nagging voice whispering, "I'm being selfish," whenever they try to just take a break and rest. So, this brings us to the absolute most vital question of our explainer. How do we break the cycle without breaking the family? How can the burdened eldest daughter step out of the danger zone and finally untangle her mind?
Let's explore that in Section 5, Therapeutic Healing and IFS, Untangling the Mind.
Thankfully, clinical psychology offers some seriously powerful solutions to process these early childhood burdens. One of the absolute most effective approaches is internal family systems, or IFS therapy. IFS basically teaches you to view your mind as a collection of different parts. Right now, your over-responsible caregiver part is driving the bus, and it's completely exhausting you. IFS, along with things like schema therapy, helps you isolate that specific caregiver part from your core self. You actually learn to acknowledge your neglected inner child. This allows you to finally heal the trauma of parentification by giving yourself the compassion your parents couldn't provide. To actually support this clinical healing, therapists will often prescribe something that sounds, well, surprisingly simple, but is incredibly difficult for overachievers: daily play. You literally have to intentionally engage in activities that have absolutely zero productivity goals. We're talking about coloring books, playing simple games, doing a bit of journaling. You have to ask yourself a pretty profound question. What did I actually enjoy doing before I had to grow up too soon? It's all about abandoning that obsession with being useful and reconnecting with your own personal joy. Psychologist Dr. Abigail Lev also highly recommends using self-compassion techniques to systematically rewrite that false belief that you only deserve love when you're serving others. Try a loving-kindness meditation. Imagine a friend facing your exact struggles. What kind of comfort would you give them, right? Now turn around and give that exact same comfort to yourself. Write out self-compassion letters to reframe your guilt over setting boundaries. And maybe most importantly, just allow yourself to feel the anger and the grief for your lost childhood, and do it without judging yourself.
Finally, let's get practical in Section 6, Setting Boundaries for Burnout, Reclaiming the Self.
If you want to stop this endless cycle of overcommitment, you've got to start with small, incremental boundaries. Step 1. Communicate using clear I statements, like "I am at capacity." Step 2. Enlist allies. Directly ask a sibling to take over a specific chore. Step 3. Set those small boundaries, like maybe delaying your response to a non-urgent family text. Step 4. Crucially, expect resistance. When you change the rules of the game, your family will probably try to guilt trip you. Stand firm. And Step 5. Plainly point out unfair imbalances. Remember, a boundary isn't a rejection of your family. It's quite literally a requirement for your survival. The ultimate goal here is separating your personal value from your family productivity. It's about affirming every single day, "I am worthy of rest even when I'm not helping anyone." Delegate those long-term caregiving duties. Stop feeling obligated to financially or emotionally bankroll your adult siblings' problems. You can love your family deeply, like really deeply, while mentally handing back that baton of responsibility that was so unfairly handed to you as a kid. And for any parents watching, the clinical data from the University of Reading actually gives us a really clear roadmap to prevent these exact OCD vulnerabilities in the next generation. The main strategy is to foster healthy independence. Praise and reinforce your kid when they do things independently, but avoid those extremes we talked about earlier. Do not parentify them with rigid adult duties, but also don't anxiously overprotect them and shield them from the real world. Let them be capable, for sure, but please, let them be kids. We've covered a ton of ground today, from heavy cultural burdens all the way to clinical anxiety pathways. But I want to leave you with one final, incredibly powerful question. If you didn't feel responsible for anyone else today, who would you choose to be? Take a moment. Really sit with that thought. Consider what your life, your joy, and your future might actually look like if you finally set down the heavy cape of the eldest daughter. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Catch you next time.